Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It's Friday, February 11th in the United States. It's Saturday, February 12th in New Zealand, and our special guest today is Wayne MacKintosh. Now, he is coming in from New Zealand, and there's a bit of latency, so you'll notice a little bit of a gap between when I finish speaking and he says he's here. But welcome, Wayne.
Steve, thank you very, very much on behalf of the Wiki Educator family and the Open Education Resource Foundation. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to come share some thoughts and ideas around some of the things that we're doing. Coming from New Zealand, we're in the fortunate position of having seen the future that has already happened, and I can assure you your Saturday is just going to be beautiful.
Well, I've just realized that I forgot to load the balance of the slides. So what I'm going to do is ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to talk a little bit about your background. And then when you're done with that, I'll come back on. Hopefully the slides will be loaded and we can talk about the specific project and some other things. So could you give us a few minutes on what you've done in the past and where you are now?
Sure, Steve, not a problem. Let's start in the beginning. I started life training as an accountant, but we won't talk much about that. And, sort of very early on in my career, I figured out that I was not going to be able to spend, 40 years of my life in the accounting profession. And I decided to become a teacher. And I have to say it's been the best decision I've taken in my life. I spent most of my career working in the university sector, largely in open distance learning, distance education, at single mode distance teaching universities, as well as distance education at traditional face-to-face institutions. In the last couple of years, I've been very, very fortunate in having opportunities to really live out my passion, which is learning for development and how we can actually widen access to learning around the world. I had the privilege of spending 3 years working at the Commonwealth of Learning, which is an international intergovernmental agency working across the 53 member states of the Commonwealth, the former British Empire. And now leading a very exciting venture at the Open Education Resource Foundation. So a little bit about my background, and I have to say this work in open education has been the most rewarding of my professional career.
Wayne, really appreciate your coming on. Many of us who are here today, I think, are very excited to talk to you about this. I was just at a conference in Texas where I gave a couple of sessions on open source, and I can't wait to kind of tell you the reaction. The slides should be loaded now, so we're going to do a couple of quick things. I want to recognize that Illuminate helps to support this series, and the project I work on for Illuminate is called Learn Central. It's a social network for educators. Coming up on the Future of Education next week, David Perkins and Kevin Kelly, and the week after that, John Seeley Brown. Lots of other fun events, hopefully something that will be of interest to you there. If you've missed any sessions, of course, they are all recorded, and they're up at futureofeducation.com. We do have some special crowdsourced activities, both at Q and at ISTE. I won't spend any time on those at this point in time, but we'll keep talking about them in future sessions. If this is your first time in Illuminate, it is a participative environment. I hope that you'll find ways to participate. We will go to Q&A. And if you think you'd like to ask Wayne a question using the microphone, which you can do, please at this time go to Tools, Audio, run the Audio Setup Wizard to make sure that your microphone is working well. And again, because we've sort of shifted the sequence here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how Illuminate works. But if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll try and catch up on them. But it is fun to know where you're participating from. So go ahead and look for the wand with the red star at the end. It's to the left of the map. Click on that, and then click on the map. Looks like Wayne's quickly in New Zealand. Someone in the British Isles. good representation in North America. Feel free to do a shout out in the chat. Let us know where you are, what time it is. It's fun to know the weather as well. Wayne, I see you're not alone in New Zealand. Someone in Brazil. Okay, I'm going to move us forward. So, before we talk specifically about the OER University and the open source efforts, I want to tie the current news in Egypt a little bit to what we're seeing. And what kind of connections do you make with changes in institutions and the degree to which openness and open communications are providing avenues for sort of grassroots movements?
Gee, Steve, that's a tough question. I guess we're seeing significant shifts, specifically in the education area, in relation to technology and the whole idea of open source in education, specifically relating to the fact that individual educators are now empowered to share their knowledge freely through the use of technology. And using open content licenses, this creates a very new situation for the future of education, and not necessarily something that has to be in competition with traditional education models, but rather approaches where we can augment and add value to the education systems around the world. And I guess one of the big challenges and issues and problems I think a lot about every day when I wake up is the 100 million learners currently today who are qualified to have a seat in a tertiary education institution that are not going to have the privilege of an education. And when I think about that, it's simply ludicrous that in today's world, where we have the technologies to share knowledge freely, that we have a situation where large numbers of young people and adults around the world are just not going to have the privilege of an education. So in that respect, I think we have unprecedented opportunities for community engagement in building these futures. And I guess the significant difference is the fact that we as individuals, you and I, can make can have a very positive impact in addressing this problem.
So Wayne, you've had some experience with this in Wiki Educator. Could you tell us a little bit about what that project is and how it works?
Well, Wiki Educator is a community wiki of educators from around the world who are collaborating on the development of free education materials. Our mission and aim is ideally collaborating with other open education projects around the world to develop digital learning materials in support of all national curricula by 2015. And some folk may say, may say to us, you guys are absolutely crazy. We're not going to get this right by 2015. My usual response is, 2017 will be just fine. The project started out as really as an experiment off a small desktop server at the University of Auckland. And it's grown from there. Today we have just over 17,000 registered users from around the world. 72% of Wiki educators are either teachers, lecturers, or trainers working in the formal education sector. So in that respect, Wiki Educator is a little different from some of the other large public wikis. Our age profile is also very representative of the teaching profession. Half our users are over the age of 45. Which initially for me was a bit of a surprise, because you would kind of think it would be the 22-year-old web geeks that would be joining the project. But I guess it makes sense. If our age demographic is the teaching profession, that's about right. One of the interesting things, we collect data from all our new users. And one of the interesting facts is that, and surprisingly even in today's age, that 2/3 of our new account holders have never created a wiki account on any wiki before. And that's quite surprising, given that wikis as technology are about 15 years old. But to respond to that challenge, we run in fact the world's largest free training program to build wiki skills in education. I mean, we will provide free training to any warm-blooded, as in mammal, educator in the world who wants to learn how to use a wiki for the development of open education resources. We will provide free training, and to date we've provided free training opportunities to about 5,300 educators from 140 different countries around the world. So we use the same technology, the same open source software that runs Wikipedia. I serve on the International Advisory Board of the Wikimedia Foundation, and we do collaborate a lot on the development of technology. I mean, a good example is the wiki to print capabilities that are now available on the MediaWiki software engine, which allows you to build customized books. So, as an educator, if you wanted to put together a book, you could choose chapter 1, choose chapter 3. You don't like chapter 2, you want to write your own chapter 4. You can produce a customized book, which can be downloaded as a PDF file. Alternatively, which can be purchased, from a print-on-demand publisher. And this is a significant technology because, if we look at countries like Sub-Saharan Africa, where the majority of learners are not going to have internet connectivity, it is incredibly important to be able to have learning materials available in formats which aren't necessarily dependent on internet connections. This technology, we also have a beta version of this technology that would provide this book that you've now created in open document text format, which of course is the open file format used by word processors, which then means that teachers can then download this customized book and edit and adapt and modify these course materials on their desktops. And I think that's very, very important for teachers. I'm a teacher myself, and I've yet to find anybody else's lecture notes that I would want to use without adapting or modifying. So, slowly as the project is maturing, we are learning more about what's going to work in the open education arena. And if I look at the growth curves, I think we're really at the bottom of the exponential growth that we're going to see happening over the next couple of years.
So I gave 2 sessions on open source at the Texas show this week. One was an open source panel, and one was just an introduction to open source software and open educational resources. And I had a very interesting experience because I've been running open source labs and open source speakers tracks for the larger shows here for about 5 years. And I've always accepted that oftentimes the main motivation for coming is the lack of licensing cost, that a good part of the audience is there just in order to learn to save money. But I had a little bit of I would say almost a discouraging experience in the State of Open Source panel that we did, because we had 4 administrators or teachers who were using open source, who were part of an open source movement in Texas, and they didn't really themselves feel very strongly about the open source ethos. For them, it really was about the cost savings. And it was the first time that I'd actually had people who were sort of large figures in that open source arena sort of candidly admit they didn't really care that much about the ethos. It was more about the cost. So how much educating needs to be done, and do you feel like that we will grow, or is this confusion of Web 2.0, open source, freeware, things that are free, is that just going to continually be a barrier to the understanding of the value of openness?
Steve, I think that's a very good question. Just a quick initial response. People who are joining the open source movement, just for cost savings. My response is, they're free to do so, and most welcome to do so. It's part of the spirit of the movement. In the words of even Moglen, we created this. To take it, use it, adapt it, modify it. It's free. You can even sell it if you want to. And I don't think people that are testing the open source waters out of a cost motivation perspective is necessarily a bad thing, because what it does do is it opens up opportunities to discover what the movement is really about, and the core freedoms which are very important to us. And the Wiki Educator project and the OER Foundation subscribes to something we call free cultural works licensing, which is rooted in the Richard Stallman's essential freedoms. And as an educator, those freedoms are very, very important to us. We do not want to deny any educator in the world the opportunity to benefit from our open education resources. And we don't want any educator in the world to have to sacrifice any of their freedoms in order to participate in our project. And in a very practical sense, in many parts of the world, educators and teachers simply do not have the money to be able to purchase software licenses for non-free software. And we don't want to deny any educator from participating in this movement, and is the reason why we have a strong commitment to open file formats and free cultural works licensing. So in this way, we do not force any educator to take any decisions or sacrifice any freedoms around their software choices. So both educators who prefer to use non-free software, as well as educators who choose to use a free software, will be able to participate because we're using open file formats. But the fundamentals of the movement are going to grow simply because of the foundations of freedom on which the movement is based. I mean, every modern democracy today on the planet respects freedom of speech, and it is this freedom of speech which is the cornerstone, of our education systems. And if we think about this in very practical terms, the internet is really just a system of pipes and switches. And OER as digital artifacts, they want to be free. OER is just digital data, and OER doesn't care where it is hosted. OER doesn't care which pipes transport the information from point A to point B, whether it's copper wire or fiber optic cable or ADSL. I mean, OER doesn't care which technologies or which pipes are transporting the data. The problem that we have in the world today are the switches, and these are the institutions and organizations and individuals that attempt to regulate access to that data. So these are the people that determine the price, who gets access, in what formats. And I think this is a significant challenge we are facing, both in education and in other sectors of society. And there is really no reason why we today have to restrict anybody to accessing knowledge freely. I mean, reflecting back on some even Moglen's thinking, hypothetically, if we look at the problem of global starvation, I mean, hypothetically, if we had the technology to be able to reproduce food, to feed the hungry at the press of a button, why would we charge the hungry more than they can afford? And similarly, in the education sector, I see that I don't see any reason why we as educators shouldn't be, willing to share our knowledge freely, based on these principles. And we have the technologies to do this. So, for example, the Open Education Resource Foundation, which is an independent international nonprofit entity, runs entirely on open source software. And I think we have unprecedented opportunities to be able to realize the vision of free knowledge for all, and this is what we're doing. And we're looking forward to educators around the world helping us achieve this aim.
So let's let you segue to the university idea. I know you have an event coming up that you would like to describe and encourage some form of participation. But why don't you give us a little bit of the background and let's move into the discussion about the university.
Sure. I think there are two significant factors that will make the future of an open education resource university, free learning for all students worldwide, a reality. First, the marginal cost of replicating digital knowledge is near zero. So to be able to provide opportunities for distribution of free knowledge is a no-brainer, really, if you think about it. The second fact that digital technologies and open content licensing enables us is a simple mathematical fact. It's not rocket science. If 10 people or 10 institutions work together on the development of course materials, it's going to be far cheaper than doing it alone. And if I look at most of the developed world and the OECD countries, in the majority of these countries, the cost of education and tuition fees have been rising in excess of the inflation index. And we are simply going to have to get a lot smarter in terms of how we design, develop, and share learning materials. And we have the opportunities today to do this. And so the OER University concept is really about achieving these significant savings in costs by working together on the development of course materials. And one of the challenges we are faced with in the OER movement at the moment is surprisingly and paradoxically the lack of collaboration among organizations that are working in the OER space. The vast majority of open education resource initiatives, I mean, if we think of MIT OpenCourseware or the British Open University's Open Learn project, are institution-based projects. And I don't see much collaboration happening among institutions developing shared course materials. So one of the things I think, while the notion of sharing to learn is a good idea, I think it's more important for us as educators and institutions to learn how to share and to learn how to collaborate better. So one important facet of the concept of the OER University is to facilitate improved collaboration among institutions working in the post-secondary education sector. So that's on the institution side, the delivery side. We also need to think, from the student's perspective, and given these technologies, it is plausible that we would be able to provide independent learning materials for every conceivable subject on the planet, and provide free learning for all learners on the planet. The next challenge, of course, is if we have free learning for all learners on the planet, is we've got to figure out how do we credentialize, how do learners who are studying for free using OERs achieve credible university credentials. And this is what the OER university concept is setting out to address. We're a number of anchor partners, a number of institutions around the world who are committed to doing this. And Athabasca University in Canada, the University of Southern Queensland in Australia, Otago Polytechnic here in New Zealand, and the OER Foundation. We've scheduled an open planning meeting to start planning the realization of an open education resource university. And the ultimate aim is to design an ecosystem where learners who are studying OERs for free around the world will be able to have flexible pathways to obtaining credible credentials.
So when I put the link in for the meeting agenda, I think I'd like to have you talk about how you would want people to be involved. But before we do so, I'm intrigued by a thought that's occurring to me. So I think about MIT's OpenCourseWare, and I think about the description you've just given. And in an open culture, which is so geared toward engagement and contribution, both of those sound very one way. I think David Wiley called MIT OpenCourseWare Open 1.0. Is there a future even further beyond that where there's greater contribution instead of just receipt of materials?
Steve, I think you're absolutely right. It is a big challenge. I mean, at one level, I mean, if you think about it and think about human nature, it's easier to give than it is to receive. And so the notion of a single institution saying, hey, I'm wanting to donate or give away some course materials, that's a lot easier to do than actually to start from a point where we have a look at what education materials are already out there, for remixing, improving, and avoiding the big challenge of reinventing wheels. That is a lot harder to do, and I think we need to work on the culture shift in learning how to collaborate, in learning how to share. And I mean, if you take the open source software movement, for example, any developer that is worth their salt, that is going to embark on developing a new piece of software, the very first thing that they will do is they will go and see what existing code is out there that already exists, that we can reuse, and adapt, and modify for our specific purposes. And I don't see that culture in the open education resource movement yet. But I do think it's going to change because I think it's a capability maturity model. As we're moving forward, we are learning more about how this collaboration works, and we're learning more about the benefits of collaboration. And collaboration is hard work. It doesn't come naturally. We need to support it. And I think this is the next phase we are going to see in the open education resource movement. Frankly, I think it's inevitable. It's part of the natural evolution process we're going to see in the education sector. And just to get back to your earlier reference about the meeting, I should just take one step back and mention that the Open Education Resource Foundation, the independent non-profit which oversees Wiki Educator and the work we're doing around the Open Education Resource University, is a commitment to a philosophy of what we call open philanthropy. And that is, we believe that in order to effect real social change in the world, we can do this by open sourcing everything, if you will. And what this in effect means is that all our planning documents, all our strategic plans, even our funding proposals, because as an educational charity, we do receive funding from the international donor community. And even our funding proposals are developed openly under open content licenses. And sometimes people say to me, Wayne, you're absolutely crazy. I mean, how can you develop a funding proposal, openly? What if somebody steals your idea? And the reality is, in an open, self-organizing ecosystem, if somebody else is able to achieve the objectives of a funding proposal we are putting forward cheaper, faster, and more effectively than we are able to do as an open education resource foundation, we all win by that. I mean, this is non-zero-sum collaboration, because the outputs of an open project will be available for all of us to use. And so this is how the ecosystem is maturing. And our commitment to open philanthropy means that all the planning for this open education resource university will be conducted openly and transparently in the wiki. And we extend an open invitation to any institution in the world who wants to join us as an anchor partner. Any institution that cares about sharing of knowledge as a core activity of what we do is most welcome to come and join us. And so the meeting scheduled for the 23rd of February is really the inaugural meeting to start planning an open education resource university, an OER university. And the meeting is open to any warm-blooded educator on the planet who wants to join in and help plan these futures. There is a web page. If you go to the home, or you've posted the web page, but you can also go to Wiki Educator's homepage. There's a link to the OER University press releases and the website, and you can just go in and register, and we'll send you information, about the meeting. And this is really an opportunity for every educator to actually make a difference. You can plan the future of an OER university. We're also very, very fortunate to have BC Campus in Canada, who is running a pre-meeting open seminar on the OER University, which starts next week on the 16th of February, where colleagues from around the world are discussing what the objectives, motivations, opportunities, barriers, and these kinds of suggestions for building an OER university, and those discussions will be a key input into the meeting of the 23rd of February. So lots of opportunities to come and make the future happen, and it is a large and ambitious project. And we're going to need all the help we can get in, achieving success.
So, Wayne, where's the information on the things that start this next week, the training? I'm just going to take a quick look now, and I'll find the link, and I'll add it into the chat box. You can also just do a Google search for SCOPE, S-C-O-P, and you'll find the link there, and I'll post it in a moment in the chat box.
I'm wondering if I got the right one.
Oh, there we go. Yes, somebody has already posted it in the chat box. I'm struggling to find the link, but somebody's fast. Here's a good example of collaboration. Look at that. Wayne, before we shift to Q&A, was there anything else you wanted to communicate either about Wiki Educator, the foundation, or the university project?
Nothing specific other than, I really hope that we as educators can, start coming together and realizing the inevitable future of open education resources. The work that we are doing around the OER University is not in any way intended to dismantle the formal education system in any way. What we are aiming to achieve is through the community service mission of every modern tertiary education institution to develop, if you will, a parallel learning universe which can augment and improve the quality of learning for all learners on the planet. The reality is institutions will not lose their competitive advantage by sharing education materials. It's just not going to happen. There's no research evidence that I'm aware of that justifies that you will lose students if you share your learning content. I mean, I've had the privilege of studying at a number of institutions around the world, and I've yet to base my decision to study at any given institution based on the prescribed textbooks that they are prescribing. Education is more about the quality of learning which we provide and the quality of support we provide our learners. And effectively, we are not asking for copious amounts of new money to be invested to build an OER university. It just requires a shift in resource allocation. If every institution in the world were able to allocate 1% of their community service budget to the collaborative development of OER, I'm pretty sure in no time we would be able to provide a full curriculum of high-quality materials for all the learners of the world. So, it's an ambitious project, a lot of work to do in order to get that right. But hey, we've made a start, and it's looking promising. Look forward to the questions.
Okay, so we'll switch to Q&A here. Joe asks, the major hurdle for students taking OER is assessing the courses so they can get credit. How do you see partners colleges facilitating that process?
Joe, that's a very good question. And first off, I don't think at this point in time we have all the answers. I mean, this is kind of the purpose of the planning meeting, is to start looking and interrogating and finding the detailed solutions to these questions. However, there are a couple of ideas which are emerging already in terms of how this might work. The OER University is not a teaching institution. It's not a bricks and mortar institution. Think of the OER University as a virtual collaboration of like-minded institutions around the world that want to achieve these objectives. The fact that we can provide free learning through independent study course materials is one part of the puzzle. We also need to think about, how do we provide, quality student support in an open ecosystem like this. And some of the early thinking is that it may be possible through community service learning approaches at our institutions where more senior students provide learner support for junior students as part of their service learning credits. So that might be one way in which we can scale student support and tutor support in an open system like this. When it comes to the credentials, we envisage that the credentials will be conferred by formal education institutions that are participating in this OER university concept. What is mission critical for us where we sit is developing credible qualifications. And this is not to discredit the notion of informal learning that takes place on the web. I mean, there are many good examples around the world of the growth of informal learning. All I'm saying is that is not the niche area where the OER University is going to be working. We are working within the formal education sector. So we are building up partnerships with real institutions, real credible institutions that will agree to providing credentials, based on an OER curriculum. That is decided by the participating institutions. There may be a fee for service around the credential, because at the end of the day, the people who are assessing have the fundamental human rights of earning a living. And this is why, again, the core feeders are so important, and why it is so important that we don't put non-commercial restrictions on open content, because unfortunately that's a way of favoring the rich at the expense of the poor, but also denying the fundamental right to earn a living. But as I mentioned earlier, we already have 3 formal education institutions that have agreed that they will provide credentialing services around this OER university concept. So it's looking promising. We're getting very good support from the international agencies in achieving these objectives. So I hope that answers your question.
Wayne, there's an interesting question here from Cultural Research. A lot of revolutionaries in Egypt have college degrees and no future. There's a growing phenomenon. This is a growing phenomenon worldwide. How does that affect concepts of a free online college degree?
It's again a very, very good question, and to be honest, I'm not sure that I have the answers. Other than to say that I think an open, self-organizing ecosystem around OER is likely to have a better chance at finding answers to those problems, and finding the linkages between real employment and education, because open systems tend to be more responsive than closed systems. And I'm hoping that the component of figuring out how this all works in terms of not ending up in a scenario where we have people with qualifications that just aren't finding gainful employment. I'm hopeful that during the planning processes there will be an activity or a group that will focus on this problem and figure out how we can address it. Worst case scenario, I don't think the OER University will do any worse than the formal education sector is doing at the moment on that problem. So we have every opportunity to improve it. Very good question.
I'm gonna try and add to that a little, Wayne, because I've been thinking about this a lot. And one of the things that question presupposes, and I think it's a message we hear a lot in our Western culture, and especially here in the United States, is the idea that learning is specifically tied to some kind of business or financial success. And I think you could easily make the argument there is inherent value in learning that goes to quality of life issues, that also then hopefully does relate to employment, gainful employment, and other positive things. But that may not necessarily need to be the primary argument. That some of the benefits that we see economically should be seen as secondary benefits if we're thinking of education on a broader scale. Maria asks, what do you think of P2PU and other such open university projects?
I think the peer-to-peer university and the University of the People, the work that the Saylor Foundation are doing are all amazing projects. I mean, this is the beauty and the power of OER. As I mentioned earlier, open education resources don't care where they are hosted. I see the OER movement evolving as an ecosystem where high quality OERs that have been developed by the peer-to-peer university community could just as easily be used within the OER university environment. And similarly, all the content that the OER university produces will be available to the planet. I think what we are seeing maturing in the open education resource movement are the specific niche areas that the project nodes around the world are focusing on. The Wiki Educator community and the OER Foundation is very strong in the formal education sector. What the contribution we are hoping to make is to have a look and see, well, to what extent can the formal education sector contribute to this evolving ecosystem. And just tying up with what Steve reflected on a few moments ago, I think there's huge value in informal learning, and which isn't necessarily tied up with the issue of gaining a qualification or getting gainful employment. I mean, there are a whole raft of reasons why people learn, and I mean, I can just think of my own personal experiences. I have been engaged in formal learning for most of my professional career because you move around, you do different things. And there are many areas where I don't have any formal qualifications, but through interacting with peers on the net and accessing resources that are available, I've been able to improve my knowledge for specific reasons and purposes. So I think the peer-to-peer university concept and the other projects are a very, very important part of this ecosystem. And we will need to start thinking about, well, okay, so if we have a bunch of learners who have done a bunch of interesting courses at the peer-to-peer university and at some point may want to get some formal recognition for that, I mean, how do we address that problem and that opportunity, in fact? And that's part of what we're wanting to do with the OER university concept. The peer-to-peer university have been working with a very innovative kind of open source approach to credentialization in collaboration with the Mozilla Foundation, evolving a very exciting badge system, which is really a replication of the open source model of meritocracy in terms of how through engagement in the community you gain recognition and kudos through the community. And it's a rigorous process. But the thing is, the OER university, we're not here to replicate that. The peer-to-peer university is going to do a far better job of that part of the ecosystems. Where we're focusing is on the formal education area.
So if you'd like to ask Wayne a question using the microphone, feel free to raise your hand. That's the hand icon below at the lowest part of the participant box with the hand icon with the green up arrow. So Carol has a question. And Carol, I'm going to give you the microphone and turn the mic on by clicking at the lower left of your screen.
Thank you. If you can hear me, please put a Y in the box. Thank you. My question was, with the OER, the studies or courses will be developed by members of the consortium in collaboration. Is there a specific LMS that's going to be followed, or will that particular option be left open to the course/study developers?
Hi, Hi, Carol. Yes, a very, very good question. Where our thinking is at the moment is we do not want to dictate or prescribe any learning management system for any institution. Because in order for this to be successful, we must recognize that different institutions use different learning management systems for their own good reasons. So the thinking at the moment is, I think what is also important to recognize here is when you think about OER, because of the open licensing that is used, there is no reason why OER has to be locked down behind a password. And that's very, very different to the sort of the closed education resource area, because you've got all the issues around copyright we've got to worry about, keeping the stuff behind a password access to your registered students. So in the OER world, we don't have that problem. Our OER can reside openly on the web. And we've been experimenting with a few very, very interesting technologies, and it's not rocket science at all. It's just the fact that we use open source and we use open content licensing, where you are able to integrate and embed learning content, for example, that sits in Wiki Educator into your learning management system just using an iframe tag. And that's just a little bit of HTML which the Wiki Educator website will produce for you, and you can have content, learning materials that have been designed and developed collaboratively sitting in your learning management system of choice. So what I'll do is I'll quickly find a link for you which gives you a little bit more information about that feature, and you can experiment with it yourself. We've tested this feature of just using iframes to embed learning content that resides within Wiki Educator in a whole range of a number of different learning management systems, and it's actually quite a neat way of enhancing reuse and avoiding the situation of reinventing wheels. So what I'm going to post here is a link on links, which gives a little bit of background about how this might work. So to answer your question, institutions will be able to use the learning management system of their choice, but we will collaborate in other environments to develop the content. One of the disadvantages of a learning management system is that they aren't designed for the collaborative development of content. It's very hard for 15 educators to work on the development of a specific subsection in a Moodle course, for example.
Wayne, if you don't know Maria Druzhkova's comments in the chat, I hope that you will get to know her. But she asks, while indexing and discovering static OERs is relatively easy, indexing interactions, events, is still very hard and non-standardized. Any thoughts on this? Even discovering what forum to use to ask a question is very hard at the moment.
Hi, Maria. Thanks for the question. I've never met Maria, but she has been quite active in the Wiki Educator community. Maria, it's a very good question, and I think it's an area we need to address. I don't know what the answers are going to be. All I can say is I think we collectively recognize that that this is a challenge and we're going to have to address it. So we need to get the right people together to start thinking about the problem and finding the solutions. So I do apologize. I don't have any specific thoughts and ideas of how we might address that at this time.
Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left. If you have a question for Wayne, you'd like to ask it in the chat. If I've missed one for some reason, please feel free to post it again. Otherwise, you can raise your hand using the hand with the green up arrow. Wayne, thanks for being so good about the delay, the pauses, and using the code to let us know when you finished. I think you did a great job. Let's give you a little early applause here. Really appreciate your coming on and taking the time. I'm fascinated by this project. Really appreciate your sharing it with us.
And Steve, from our end as well, a big thank you again for the opportunity just to talk a little bit about this. And I hope that the folk who've been listening will come and join us in the planning session. But also, if you know colleagues, friends who have an interest in this area, spread the word. We are very serious about getting this right, and we need the caliber of your experience to achieve these objectives. So thanks again, Steve. You run a great initiative, and these interviews are an incredible resource for finding about what is happening around the world. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Okay, so Theo has a question. And Wayne, I don't know if you know, but I actually did a series of interviews with Richard Stallman and Eric Raymond and the like on open source and education. And if you haven't seen those, and I need to be putting a link to them somewhere, just let me know. Theo, I've given you the mic. Feel free to turn your mic on, lower left of your screen. There you go.
Thanks. I unfortunately was teaching while this wonderful event was taking place. The other side of that, though, is the recording page that Marie's just put up. I will be sharing this with as many people as I can, Wayne. And so thank you, because it's not just the live event right now. It's also being able to share the recording with others that will contribute to this fantastic work. So thank you for the link, and thank you for the presentation.
Theo, my pleasure, and I really appreciate your efforts in helping build the future.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. Thanks everybody for coming. It was an earlier event than normal for us. Wednesday is just starting. Thanks to Learn Central, Illuminate for helping support the series. Please do consider coming to one of our upcoming events, including, of interest to this group, probably Mitch Resnick on March 10th. We sure appreciate that you have been here and hope that it's been worthwhile. Thanks, Wayne. Have a great day. Really fun to get to know you a little.
Yeah, great opportunity, and thanks again. We'll no doubt connect in the virtual world. See you all.
Thanks, everybody. That was terrific. I'll post the recording link as soon as I receive it in that Learn Central event. You can go to my web announcement at stevehargadon.com. It links also to that Learn Central page. The full Illuminate recording will be up there. And then at futureofeducation.com, we'll post the MP3, so it's part of the stream. And you can always go back into the recording and find those links if you've missed them to the training that starts next week and then the actual event later this month. Take care, everybody.